All right, looks like we are live. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny B, and I am your host and moderator for tonight's debate on creation versus evolution. It is a privilege to have Matt Powell and David Emery here with me for this important and much anticipated debate. Again, we've got the good old classic debate, creation and evolution. I am excited for this. Matt, David, gentlemen, thank you so much for giving us your time for tonight's debate. Before we get right into it, though, why don't we kind of break the ice, get to know the debaters a little bit, and why don't we start with David? David, thanks again for being here. How are you tonight? A little bit about yourself, a little bit about your channel.
I'm doing really well. I do have a channel, Turbo Brain. I try to present scientific concepts. I've been on kind of a hiatus. I may get back to it at some point. I was raised in a fundamentalist Pentecostal home. I've been a Christian for 63 years. I was a licensed minister for a while. I went to college at one of the premier research institutions in the United States. And so I've been interested in science my whole life. I worked for a university. I have been a assistant professor at a major university. I also worked for NASA for 16 years as a statistical data analyst. And I just recently retired from the state of New Mexico, where I was the database administrator. I do want to say one thing that's rather personal. I got this from the comments from my last debate. I want to assure everybody that my hands shake like this because I have a genetic disorder called essential tremor. Affects my voice, my head, just about everything. So I just want to let you know I'm not going to keel over and die. I'm ready for the debate. I'm anxious to hear what Matt has to say tonight. That's all from me.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I do appreciate that, David. Your relevant links are in the description box, channel, and previous debate. And we have a lot of comments coming in. Yes, we did coordinate. It is Blue Shirt Monday, so this is a requirement for this debate. Matt Powell, good to have you, brother. How you been? A little bit about yourself, a little bit about your ministry.
Sure thing, Donnie. Thank you so much for having me on. I've been doing pretty good. So yeah, my channel basically just deals with creation versus evolution, the dinosaurs, the fossil record, the Big Bang Theory versus Christianity and God speaking the universe into existence. And so I'm definitely looking forward to the discussion tonight. I deal with a lot of different topics. You can watch some of my past debates where I've gone up against certain PhD scientists and other people on the topic of creation versus evolution. And so I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what Mr. Emery has to bring to the table tonight. And yeah, if you guys are new to my channel, make sure to check out some of the documentaries that I produced. Dr. Hovind and I actually teamed up and produced a film about 4 years ago called Science Falsely So Called. And so I would definitely recommend that one if you'd like to pick one of the four. And so with that being said, thank you so much for having me on, Donnie. And like I said, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Matt, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you to the both of you for those introductions. So real quick, I'll go over the format for tonight's debate. We're going to be having 12-minute opening statements. David Emery is going to be starting us off with his opening statement. I'll give you gentlemen a 1 minute warning once we get to the 11 minute mark. That way you'll know to kind of start winding things down. Then we're going to have an 8 minute uninterrupted rebuttal. I'll do the same thing. We hit the 7 minute mark, give you a 1 minute warning. Then we're going to have a roughly 30 minute, just free flowing discussion where David and Matt are discussing the points brought up in the opening statements and rebuttals. And then we're going to have a 5 minute closing statement. And then this is where we get you guys in the audience involved. We're going to have an audience Q&A. So please make sure you're tagging me with your questions. Let's keep them on topic. The topic for tonight again is creation versus evolution. David, we're going to hand it over to you. You've got 12 minutes. If you need to share screen or anything like that in terms of slides, just let me know and I can help you with that as well. But the floor is yours, David.
Yes, I do need to share the screen.
No problem. No problem. So if you I'm just looking here. I don't see the screen shared yet. Once you hit the share screen button, David.
Oh, yeah.
At the bottom, you'll see like a mini box of your entire screen. You'll want to click that. And then that way I'll be notified so then I can put your slides out to the audience. Also at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a share button. It should highlight blue. And then that way you'll be able to click it. As you're doing that, it looks like Doki Doki Bible Club. Thank you so much. The chat is already lively. Lots of excitement for this debate. Turns out there will be an open mic after show immediately following this debate on Logical, Plausible, Probables channel. And again, please make sure you're tagging me with your questions. Topic, creation versus evolution. David, how are we looking there?
Well, the share is not blue, it's white.
It's grayed out, yes. So make sure under the entire screen, David, you'll see a mini screen. It's just your screen, but it's like a mini version. Make sure to click that in order that the grayed out shared button should highlight for you. And then we'll be able to get it up on screen.
The share screen still, or the share button still not blue.
Does it say choose what to share? Do you see that on your end, David?
Yeah.
Okay. And underneath it, does it say entire screen?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And then underneath there, do you see a box that you're supposed to click? There should be a box right underneath where you see entire screen. Just make sure to click that so the share button becomes blue, that you can click it.
Got it.
Okay. Yeah, we got it.
Okay.
All right. So whenever you're ready, David, you've got 12 minutes and I'll start your clock on your first word. Go ahead.
Okay. So here we are. We're going to try to discuss a little bit about creation versus evolution. I have to tell you, well, I certainly believe in God. I certainly don't see any reason why God is not involved in the creation of the universe. I am very skeptical about 6,000 years and 6 literal 24-hour days. So that's where I stand. I did want to share scripture. It's my personal scripture. Isaiah 55, 8, and 9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as high as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." So I just wanted to give you a little something to think about as I go through this. I kind of got off guard a little because I planned my whole presentation around hearing Matt first. So he made me do this first. So it's all his fault. As I said, I certainly believe that God could have had his hand in the creation of the universe. And we can talk about that at some point, I guess. I think this debate is more about the macroevolution. I might be wrong, but that's what I thought we would be doing more of, just because of the interests of Mr. Powell and myself. But nonetheless, I certainly believe that creation could not have happened in 6 literal days. Someday we could go through Genesis 1 and 2 verse by verse, and I think you would see that 6 literal days is not long enough. I believe that God certainly is not afraid of time, whether you want to call it deep time or just time. I think the problem that some people have had about the physical laws, whatever, are taken care of by the fact that just in recent, like in the last 5 years, scientists have realized that space and time are kind of tied together. So they call it space-time. And so space-time is one thing, and then we have 3 dimensions, so that's 4 dimensions. And it's very easy to see how the Big Bang could have been a release of space-time, which then had the stars, the planets, the galaxies spread out across the universe. And we don't have to worry about a rock popping into this room and exploding. So I guess that's my one big spiel. And the other would be, this is not really evolution, but the flood of Noah presents a lot of problems. You can start with creation, the patriarchs, ages, the flood itself, fossils, the geologic column, the fossil record, all of those things. There are lots of problems if you want to consider those as part of the 6,000 years. And I think that's really all I had to say right now. If you want to turn it back to Donnie now.
All right, David Emery, let me remove that from the screen. And as always, whatever time, I'm just going to reset the clock here, whatever time we don't use in terms of opening statements and rebuttals, we can put into the open discussion. So that's about 6 minutes we'll put into the open discussion. Matt Powell, let me unmute you. And whenever you're ready, brother, the floor is yours, and you've got 12 minutes.
Sure thing. Well, Mr. Emery, thank you for your opening statement, some of the points that you mentioned. I will say this. I think that assertions, we need to make sure not to just assert things to be true. We need to use arguments and so on and so forth. We want to use arguments for our position. One of the things that you said is that the flood is somehow not true. And that, one of the things that's been disproven by science is that there's a global flood. But the fact of the matter is that we have evidence of the flood everywhere. And according to an evolutionistic perspective, these mountains, for example, would have formed slowly through plate tectonics, moving an inch per year, just slowly creating these mountains. I'm sorry, they would have eroded flat as they're being created. These mountains were created catastrophically. That's the reason mountains even exist, is because of things like the flood. When you discount the flood and when you compromise as a Christian, you're literally just denying flat out evidence that you can see with your eyes. And I'm just going to kind of launch into my opening statement here. One of the things that we constantly find is C14 inside of inside of coal seams. Now, if these coal seams were all identical or all different ages, they would all have no C14 in the bottom layers. But these upper layers have C14 inside of them, and they all match identical amounts here. To be honest, I don't even know where to begin. Do you have like a argument that you want to bring to the table, David, of like a model or just something that you'd like to bring to the table instead of just asserting that the flood is false? Is there a reason why the flood is false? Am I allowed to ask that, Donnie?
Well, it's your 12-minute opening statement. So if you wanted to ask him it and then allow him to answer it, we can just kind of incorporate that into your 12-minute opening if that's what you want, Matt. So I can unmute David. Yeah.
Yeah. So David, I'm just trying to understand, like, what is it about the flood of Noah that you think is false? Because like I've shown here, you've got mountain ranges that form catastrophically and very quickly. Like what about this is false?
When I first started college, I wanted to be a geologist more than anything. I took about 18 hours of college credit for geology and geophysics. And I can tell you, I can guarantee you that those mountains do not just jump up 20,000 feet all of a sudden. Catastrophic bending. I had some slides for that. I guess if we.
Okay, so I guess what we'll do, I'll just present my opening then, and then you can explain why you think the catastrophic bending is false. I just wanted to kind of clarify and see like where you're coming from, what argument you wanted to particularly use. So I'll just jump to the opening. So obviously we find these bent rock layers, and according to your model, and you just said here that these things could not have formed slowly. These things had to have formed slowly. That just wouldn't have just bounced up there. But here's the thing. There is no other way for these rock layers to just bend themselves magically over the millions of years of time, of geologic time. That's just not possible. We see these beautiful bends in these rock layers that you can see here, and it shows that they all were formed catastrophically. Again, that's the reason why these mountains exist, Mr. Emery. Things like C14 inside of coal seams that we find. Take a close look at this picture of this mountain. You really mean to tell me that through slow and gradual uplift in the Earth's crust, that's how these mountains formed? To me, that just wouldn't make any sense. These mountains show us that catastrophism is what best explains geology. And I think the best argument against an evolutionary perspective of slow and gradual change in the Earth's crust is the fact that we find subducted plates from the crust of the Earth down inside of Earth's hot and molten mantle. Now, here's the thing, Mr. Emery. If these rocks would have slowly went down in the mantle, they would have joined the neighboring temperature. Yet we find humongous 10-mile thick pieces of cold rock that have slid 500 plus miles down into the mantle that have not heated up yet. You mean to tell me that these have sat down there for millions and millions of years? Look, this shows us that catastrophic plate tectonics is what actually put these down here. And I've seen these silly memes online that, well, these rock ages, this is one that Aaron Ra actually shared out. He says, these rocks prove that God is a fraud, that he's a fake, that he didn't really create the universe. Well, the thing is, they don't take into consideration these bent rock layers that we're finding all over the place that could not have formed outside of catastrophism. They could not have formed outside of Noah's flood. And so if you're finding 10-mile thick pieces of rock that has slid down 500 miles into the Earth's hot molten mantle that have not heated up yet, it means that they haven't been there that long. And what would happen today if something like that happened? It would cause such catastrophic plate tectonics, we would experience another worldwide flood. Those rocks are still cold, which means they have not been there that long, which means that there was a global flood in the recent past. One of the things that we find is polystratofossils. Again, these connect all of the layers. If these are slow accumulating layers that have accumulated over supposed geologic millions of years of time, that wouldn't make any sense, because these things connect all of the layers, showing that they are not all the same age. We find polystrata trees that are with a trunk at the top of the layers there. That shows that it was ripped out by catastrophism, floated around for a while, sank down, and then lithified all those layers together. And so the thing is, you can see these photos here. And again, I want you to really think about this, Mr. Emery. I did not know that you were a theistic evolutionist. I was under the impression that you were an atheist. So I really want to just try to reason with you during this discussion. I really want you to think critically about these rock layers that you're beholding right now, that you're able to see with your eyes and verify. These are 90-degree angles of rock that has not broken. What's going to happen if slow and gradual uplift happens to these rock layers? They're going to break. What happens if you step on hard rock hard enough? It shatters. These rocks had to have been moist and pliable and then lithified together. That is what we know happened. It's not just an opinion that I have. It's a fact of science. If you say that I'm wrong, you're actually arguing with something that is demonstrably true. Look, we find clams on the top of Mount Everest in the closed position. Again, clams are usually in the ocean or on the seashore. They're not on top of mountains. They didn't just walk up there. There was a catastrophic process that pushed them up there. You say, you had asserted in your opening that the flood of Noah was false. This idea of a global flood is just ridiculous. Look, we find whole whales fully preserved on the top of mountains. Again, how did they get there? Did they grow legs and walk up there? Was it some slow non-catastrophic uniformitarianistic process that put them there? I'm sorry, uniformitarianism is false. Materialism is not true. Catastrophism is what best explains geology, and catastrophism is what best explains the past. We find dinosaur tracks that stomp through the millions of years of these layers. And I've heard you talk about dinosaurs that are supposedly 65 million years old, and you say that these dinosaurs were wiped out by the Chicxulub asteroid. Well, here's the thing. The Chicxulub asteroid that supposedly killed all of the dinosaurs struck 2,000 miles away from the heart of the kill zone. So you're going to tell me that an asteroid that struck 2,000 miles away from all of these dinosaurs is what caused their death? That is a miss. Now, one of the things that we constantly find inside of dinosaur bones is C14, collagen, blood vessels, hemoglobin still in the blood. If these things are supposedly millions of years old, if dinosaurs died out 65 plus million years ago, these bioorganic materials would not even exist. So my message to theistic evolutionists and to people that compromise on what the Bible says is to just simply stop compromising, because you have to defend crazy things like blood lasting in the ground for 65 million years. You have to defend the idea that you evolved from a rock. You have to defend the idea that we evolved from literal slime that got eroded from granite rocks as it was being rained on for 2 million years. The absurdity of all of this just is mind-blowing. But here's the thing. Hitler said, if you tell a lie long enough, loud enough, and often enough, people will believe it. And unfortunately, it seems that you've kind of bought into this. I don't know if it's maybe because somebody had bullied you. I know you worked at NASA. Look, some people try to bully people into thinking that there's no God or thinking that they have the truth. But in all reality, they have nothing. And within most of these dinosaur bones that are recovered, They're unfossilized. Again, this cannot be explained using evolutionary assumptions or evolutionary methods. If you find perfectly preserved soft tissue inside of dinosaur bones, you can conclude that they died in the recent past and not millions of years ago. So this is all something that I would really encourage you to consider and take into consideration. And I think the best argument against evolution is by pointing out that the mechanism that drives evolution, the mutation, is the very mechanism that causes all systems to degrade over time. From generation to generation, we have mutations accumulating, and we actually die from these low-impact deleterious mutations. Think about this. You, David, have parents, right? Everybody has parents. And our parents, my parents, your parents, have 100 less mutations than we do. We gained 100 mutations when we were born. And when we pass on our offspring here, we have 100 to 200 mutations that get passed on to them. Natural selection cannot see these mutations. They're invisible to selection. You know what that means? That selection cannot act upon these low-impact deleterious mutations that are getting poured into the genome. This means that we did not persist for millions of years in the past because we could not have existed for millions of years in the future. The fact of the matter is that we all have low genetic diversity. If mutation through selection is what brought us here today, from SpongeBob SquarePants all the way up to Curious George to mankind, then that wouldn't make any sense because mutations actually cause deleterious information to get added. But supposedly it's the engine of evolution, the mutation. It makes no sense because there is no sense to it. What makes more sense, Mr. Emery, is that we were created and we were front-loaded by God with heterozygosity, the ability to diversify, and then we've diversified since. Think of this, we have low genetic diversity. Mutations create more genetic diversity. If mutation through selection is what brought us here, we would have tons of genetic diversity. But yet we have low genetic diversity. This is a fact of science. Young Earth creationism is true. It is based on fact. It is demonstratively and verifiably correct. And so to argue against it is really to argue against that which is scientifically known to be fact. So I would encourage you to really consider these things. And I think what I'll do is I'll just wrap it up with this. You look at the Y chromosome, for example, or better yet, since you had mentioned that we share DNA with different creatures and that this is somehow proof that we're related to these creatures, I wouldn't look at it that way. I would look at it in this way, and that's that we were created all on the same planet, and so therefore, since we're all in one environment, it would make sense then that the Creator would design us with similar strands of DNA. So just because we have similar strands of DNA with that of grass doesn't mean that we share a common ancestor with grass. It means that we're all made up of the same genetic material, which is code for life. So that's what I would encourage you to think about, Mr. Emery. Again, you know, I don't know what you believe about other things like salvation and stuff. You may even be my brother in Christ, but I'd love to see you get on the Young Earth Creationism bandwagon because it's a really good time to be a Young Earth Creationist. It's a really good time to stand on the facts and on the truth of God's Word. And if you compromise, like you're doing right now, if you compromise on this, you're left with having to defend surfing animals that had surfed over 900 miles between continents. If you think that the flood of Noah is a farce and a fairy tale, you have to defend the idea that monkeys actually rafted 900 miles from Africa to South America 34 million years ago.
1 minute.
So you want to talk about superstition? This is superstition. It says on this article, prehistoric monkeys traveled 900 miles between continents on rafts, that they literally surfed from Africa to South America. You're finding fossils that are out of place. Noah's flood is the reason that these fossils are all miscombobulated and disarticulated. That is why catastrophism is the best explanation for these things. You have to defend surfing monkeys, surfing rats, surfing dinosaurs, that these animals literally hopped on rafts and rode everywhere, because that's the only alternative for believing, or for the explanations of these fossils that we are finding out of place. So again, Noah's flood is what explains this. Noah's flood is a fact, and it was a global flood. The Bible says, for this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. The Bible says, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So don't compromise, Mr. Emery. Join us on the Young Earth Creationism bandwagon.
Matt, thank you very much for that opening statement. I do appreciate it. And we're going to move into now 8-minute uninterrupted rebuttals, and then we'll transition into just a back and forth discussion. And that should be fun. So David Emery, whenever you're ready, we will give you 8 minutes of uninterrupted time to respond to whatever you'd like to. If you do want me to put some slides up for you, I do see you screen sharing here again. I can get that up on the screen for you, but
Yes.
let me know when you're ready and I'll start your timer. 8 minutes.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm going to try to take these real fast because there was at least 15 points here. And it's amazing because every single one of these 15 points is wrong. And when you base young Earth creationism on 15 things that are absolutely incorrect, that's where you lose evolutionists. Let me start with, you didn't mention, but let me start with the good old dinosaurs farted themselves to death. If you happen to check, they say that the sauropods generated about 500 million tons of methane per year. Interestingly, just the cows generate 100 million tons of methane per year. And so you can see, I've heard it mentioned many times that cattle are one of the big contributors to climate change because they produce so much methane. So, you get all excited about about the dinosaurs. I found this article in Smithsonian Magazine, and it says, it sounds like perfect journalist bait. Earlier this week, a current biology paper proposed that the accumulated output of dinosaur farts could have changed global climate. You could hardly ask for a better story. Dinosaurs are our ever popular darlings, and you can read the rest of that. Them saying that it was all a big story and nobody believes, dinosaurs farted themselves to death. One of your points, I need to check off on my list so I don't cover it twice, but you talk about the asteroid impact. This Chicxulub asteroid, I don't know. I don't understand why you think it's so implausible to believe that an asteroid could have wiped out the dinosaurs. You must be the person that says, what is it? Close only works in horseshoes and hand grenades. Well, when the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, they weren't aiming for a specific target because that bomb is enormous and it makes a huge impact. And that's exactly what happened with this asteroid. It makes a huge impact. It throws up dust into the air. The atmosphere was affected globally because of this. temperatures were affected, all kinds of things like that. And it's all because of that Chicxulub asteroid. So, yes, an asteroid that missed the dinosaurs most definitely could have wiped everything out. Let me go back. You often mention this dinosaur peninsula. There's no such thing as a dinosaur peninsula in the United States. Google it all you want. It's not in there. I did a reverse image search for that image with the yellow there, and it's just not anywhere. I don't know what your source is for that, but having a peninsula that goes from southwest to northeast is completely against the way that the Earth is laid, or that the United States is laid out. This other one that you show with dinosaur fossils, that oval there, very nice oval, happens to cover the exact Rocky Mountains. So that is the Rocky Mountain Range right there, where that tan oval is. Then, if you look at my picture over on the right, there was a inland sea during all of this part of the ancient continent. And so it's very plausible that the Maiasaura lived in between those two branches. They certainly wouldn't have all taken off running because of a flood, because I'm sure that they're very familiar with flooding from those waterways. But the main thing I wanted to get is that dinosaur peninsula doesn't exist in North America. You often talk about the T-Rex that was buried under 50 feet of mud and was in the position of, because he was asphyxiated. That's not the truth either, because all of these animals and humans, they have what's called an opisthotonus, or it's typically called a death pose. Their muscles in the back of their neck, pull their heads back, and so you can see it in any kind of animal, not just things you think are buried in the flood. And I looked at some stuff from Mary Schweitzer. She says, one thing bothers me is that young Earth creationists take her research and use it for their own message. It bothers her because it's not the truth. When the soft tissue in the bones, real quick, let me tell you, I just saw, if you look on YouTube, they just found brain tissue in a dinosaur fossil from like 500 million years ago. But the red there says it's incorrect to claim that we know that it's impossible for soft tissue to survive in any form for 80 million years.
20
It's
seconds.
Okay. It's not the it's not that the fact that there's soft tissue makes it invalid. It's the fact the soft tissue means we've got to learn something from what we've got going. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, David, thank you so much. I gave you a couple extra minutes just because your opening statement, you did not use your full time. So Matt Powell, we're gonna no problem. We're gonna hand it over to you now for an 8-minute uninterrupted rebuttal. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Sure thing. David, thank you for the points that you brought up. Yeah, with all due respect, I do disagree. I don't see how the 15 facts that I brought up are somehow like fiction or just not true. They're just not true. I'm sorry, it is true. You can look up, anybody can Google anything that I'm saying. And everybody that Googles it will come to the same conclusion. Because the conclusion is that mutations are mistakes. Dinosaur tissue exists in the world that has not deteriorated. Over and over and over and over and over again, we see bent mountain ranges that prove that these things were catastrophically created. It's, again, this isn't just my opinion. This is a fact, right? You're not arguing necessarily with me. You're arguing with something that we know to be the case. And you said that the Chicxulub asteroid, you're insisting that that's what killed the dinosaurs, despite the fact that I brought up that it struck 2,000 miles away. Here's the thing. The scientists even admit that water burial is what killed these dinosaurs. Each of these circles that you see here on this slide are from museums across the United States. Secular science. This is not creation science. These are secular scientists that are admitting that there's 10,000 dinosaurs buried by a catastrophic inundation. A large ancient flood washed over the starfish all at once, entombing all of them. Hundreds of dinosaurs died and were buried in floods. So they're all saying that it's a flood. So this is where you've got to think about what they're admitting. Secular science admits that it wasn't just an asteroid. Even if I granted that there was an asteroid that struck the Yucatan Peninsula south of the Gulf of Mexico, even if I grant that, which I think maybe that could have been what caused the flood because we know something hit there, that is going to cause catastrophic waves, and these waves would have encompassed the entire United States. If they're burying dinosaurs, logic with me, if these waves are burying dinosaurs in the center of the United States, by definition, that is a global flood. If it is burying dinosaurs with sea life and crustaceans, which you left out, by definition, that is a global flood. What could cause a wave that is as big as a state or to encompass half of the United States and bury these dinosaurs all catastrophically, and even secular scientists know it? There is no other option than the global flood. There is no other option than catastrophism. I know you insist that uniformitarianism and all of this naturalism is the way to go, but it is false. It is not true. You brought up the dinosaurs fighting themselves to death, and of course, you're repeating what the atheist YouTubers are saying when they say, well, nobody believes that, Matt. I literally play the clips of them saying, dinosaurs did fart themselves to death. I believe it. And then the people down below comment and say, well, nobody thinks that. It's like, well, did you even watch the video? Because there's person after person after person after person insisting that they tooted, he said, and warmed the environment. That sounds even more crazy. They died from global warming, from farts. That is what some of them are saying. I'm not saying that necessarily peer review is saying this. I'm saying that there are certain people that take this so far, they think that they warm the environment so much. Everybody's worried about cow methane right now. Think about how much greater these dinosaurs were and how they think that's just, that caused their extinction. There are people who believe that. When you say nobody believes that, are you watching the videos? Are you actually really paying attention here? Because there are people that are saying this. Let's see. You said that these dinosaurs did not all take off running. Well, we have proof that they did. 10,000 adults that had left their young behind, that were buried in the center of the United States. What that means is these 10,000 adult myosaur were running from their lives. And yes, they died in asphyxiated positions. They were choking on mud. So that point is correct. They were buried with sea life and crustaceans, which proves that it wasn't just some asteroid kicking up a little bit of dust and they choked on the dust. In order to have a fossil, you have to have rapid burial. These are all things that we know for a fact. So Mr. Emery, once again, I would just encourage you, since you're not an atheist, it's not no holds barred here. I wasn't expecting this tonight. I really would love to see you come and join us and get on the bandwagon with us and just join us in this fight for truth by compromising on creation versus evolution and saying, well, I think Darwinism has a place in science when it is verifiably untrue, and I can show you why it is untrue, is nonsense. Join us, give it up. You said that you worked for NASA. That's great. There's a lot of people on NASA that actually were creation scientists. One of the men who went to the moon was a profound creationist, young Earth creationist. Secular science tries to make it out like we're just this small group of people that is just such a fringe of a certain theological viewpoint. No, it's a scientific viewpoint. It is a fact. It's based on fact. And Mr. Emery, you never really addressed any of the points that I brought up about any of the 15 points. You just hand waved them and said they're all false. Well, what specifically did I say that was wrong? What specifically did I say was false? What specifically did I say that was untrue? That you can show me that it was untrue. Yeah, like I said, these things are obvious to anybody who studies the data. And again, you brought up Mary Schweitzer. This is what they always do. Mr. Emery, this is very predictable. Everybody always says, well, Mary Schweitzer, the lady who made the discovery of these dinosaur soft tissue, says that they've misrepresented her work. Look, it doesn't matter who made the discovery. If you're finding blood in the ground, if you're finding 16 types, did you hear that? 16 types of bioorganic material that are biodegradable, that would have biodegraded by definition of what biodegradable material even is, in the ground, you can safely conclude that those materials were buried in the recent past and not millions of years ago. Again, to say that dinosaur soft tissue could last in the ground for millions and millions of years using some sort of iron cross-linking preservation technique, that takes gullibility to believe something like that. Who do they think they're kidding? Do they think we're crazy? That we're just going to believe and just eat everything up, that we've just been spoon-fed these lies, these demonstrated lies that have been taught for us for years? I'd like to encourage you to just think outside the box on this. I understand you're older than me. I want to respect your age, and I want to respect this conversation, and I respect the fact that you identify as a Christian. I think that's wonderful. But I think you need to be a biblical creationist. There are PhDs that are leaving evolution in the droves, and joining young Earth creationism. They're joining it in the droves because they know that what we are saying is true. I've talked to them personally. We have had scientists email us and say, look, you changed our mind about creation science. A lot of them were atheistic scientists. The supposed skeptics online, if they were actual skeptics, they would be skeptical of surfing monkeys. They'd be skeptical of squids and octopi riding on a comet from outer space that supposedly landed here, this panspermia theory, right? I know you may not subscribe to that, but this is what secular science has now led to. The Bible says professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Like, you actually want to submit to me that through mutations, fish turned to fishermen, goo turned to you, that bacteria evolved into biologists over millions of mutations. It is such a joke. It is a joke to anybody who knows any sort of scientific knowledge on these matters. I'm not saying you don't have scientific knowledge. I'm just saying you need to think outside of this box of mutation through selection creating these populations. It's false. If mutation through selection created populations, it would create populations, all right. It would create wrecked, havoc, destroyed, degraded, and inbred populations. And a lot of these mutations that get added to these generations, they get fixated in those populations, and then it really starts wreaking havoc. So this whole engine of evolution, this whole way in which we drive goo to you, the zoo to you, over these millions of years that we cannot observe is a mechanism that literally causes us to die.
1 minute.
Please, for the sake of this discussion, just think about what I'm saying. Don't just slap and run and say, well, all of that was just a lie. Like, how can you say that? It doesn't make any sense. We need coherency. We need scientific literacy. It is illiteracy to say, it's scientifically illiterate to say that our ancestors were sponges in the sea. Stephen Jay Gould himself said there are no missing links. The whole chain is missing. This whole geologic column, which you're adhering to, all was created at the same time. All of those layers lithified together. We know that to be the fact. And it's a fact of science. It's a fact. What we believe is based on fact. And I'd like you to address possibly cold slabs of rock that have sunk down from the Earth's crust that are the same temperature as the Earth's crust, but touching the core of the Earth even, that have sunk down into 7,000 degree hot molten rock that have just sat there, we're supposed to believe, for millions of years. No one has ever answered this. I'd like to see maybe an answer on that. Just try.
All right. Thank you, Matt, for that 8-minute uninterrupted rebuttal. Gentlemen, we've now completed the opening statements, the rebuttals, lots of interesting points on the table to discuss, that's for sure. I'm also, to the audience, I'm all caught up on questions. Just make sure you're tagging me. That way I won't miss it amongst the very lively chat tonight. So, okay, we're going to open it up for more of a free-flowing discussion. Since Matt just ended with his rebuttal, why don't we allow you to pick the first topic, David, and we'll have you and Matt go back and forth on it. So, David, go ahead.
Okay, let me tell you real quick. I read the book by Jack Horner about Maiasaura, and so I'm a little familiar with how the Maiasaura died. He says in his book they were killed by a volcanic eruption nearby. It was ash and dust and the fire, so forth, that killed the dinosaurs. If you check, I would clearly like to see you check to be sure that those dinosaurs, whether they were all stampeding in the same direction or if the bones are found scattered, that would be very interesting. The fact that they let their young, that's not true. There were nests right there with them. The nests have eggs and babies in them. He says that the adolescents are hard to tell from the adults by their skeleton. So there were adolescents, there were babies, there were eggs. So clearly that's one thing that's wrong. And I'm sorry,
David. Let's if we could, maybe we'll go one at a time. So Matt, go ahead.
Okay, so David, and again, this is points that I consistently hear. Volcanism. Of course, we predict volcanism. We predict volcanoes. That is part of the model. That is part of Noah's flood. Of course, widespread volcanism would be taken into account. And yes, they would have been choking on ash, choking on mud, as catastrophism is happening. So by admitting that there was widespread volcanism in this area is giving credence to this model. It doesn't really disprove the model. If they're dying from volcanoes are the best explanation for heat that's getting generated, because there's going to be heat coming up from the core and creating these coal seams that you see here in this photo. So these coal seams actually prove that there was a ton of heat generated. And that is exactly why volcanism is one of the things that would be included in Noah's flood. To assume that it was just water is false. To assume that there's just volcanoes is false. It was a mix of water and volcanoes, which is why they're buried with sea life and crustaceans.
How would you have a volcano under 20 feet of water or 20 meters of water.
Well, there's going to be, during the flood of Noah, there would be some places at certain times that would be exposed to the air. Because remember, you've got the tide basically just going around the earth, and it would become harmonic. And so, there's going to be places that are exposed for some time. And yeah, volcanoes happen all the time with water all around them. Actually, it starts in the water usually and comes up through. So that's how a volcano even happens. So I don't see an issue at all with that.
I understand catastrophism. I understand uniformitarianism. Those are both geological terms. They are both geological events. But let me just run through this list you keep asking about. You asked me about the cold slabs. The slab goes down from the crust and it's subducted into the mantle. It is called a cold slab because it doesn't match the temperature of the surrounding. So cold is a relative term. It's not like it's, room temperature. And they measured that temperature not with a thermometer. They measured by processes that are taking place in the mantle. And the reason that they're staying cold is because the minerals and the whatever's included in that slab are chemically bonding and chemically changing, becoming metamorphic rocks. And so they are using up that temperature as part of their descent into the mantle. They do not go to the core. They go about 500 miles down, which in my estimation is not anywhere near the core. So that was the one thing you wanted. One thing I definitely wanted to include was clams. If you check...
David, I'm just going to stop you right there because now we're on to the cold slabs topic, which is great. We'll just go one at a time. We'll allow you to kind of guide the discussion for a few, and then we'll let Matt guide the discussion for a few. So Matt, over to you. Go ahead.
Sure thing. So David, the point is that these cold slabs of rock, and I think you're missing this. The cold slabs, they have the same density. It's not necessarily that they're just that they've been sitting there for millions of years with the same density. It just wouldn't make any sense. The neighboring temperature, an average of 5,000 to 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit, is going to heat up those rocks. It doesn't matter what minerals are in the rocks. Okay, if you put a rock, it doesn't matter what kind of rock, onto a hot stove that is 7,000 degrees. It doesn't matter what kind of minerals it has in it. It's going to get to a point where it melts. Then it's going to get to a point where it just is completely joined its neighboring temperatures with the oven. So here's the thing. If you have a 10-mile thick piece of rock that has slid down 500 plus miles, and some of them, yes, they do even touch the very tip of the core, very select few, and they have not joined their neighboring temperature. The point is that these things could not have sat there for supposed millions of years of geologic time. That's the point. It would not make sense. It doesn't matter what chemical analysis that we take of them. It doesn't matter what kind of rock this is. Rock is rock. Minerals are minerals. And if they're sitting in 7,000 degree temperatures, by definition, they're going to warm up and join their neighboring temperatures. So yes, this is a great proof that uniformitarianism is false. It's a great proof that catastrophism is true. If your model was true, they'd only be moving 1 to 2 inches per year. They would melt. That rock would melt, the ocean crust, as it's moving down.
Okay. So you don't understand the chemical reactions that could be taking place in changing feldspars to, some other mineral. And you say it's catastrophism, but it's uniformitarianism that causes the slab to heat up from the surrounding rock. It's a slow, gradual process from the surrounding rock. It is not catastrophism that causes that.
So the point is that if it's, you mean to tell me that you think that this rock has been sitting there in 7,000 degree molten rock, cold slabs, for millions and millions and millions of years?
No, it wasn't millions of years. These cold slabs happen all the time. The cold slabs that are there now probably happened 100,000 years ago, maybe.
Okay,
I don't know the dates.
They rapidly
they did not.
Are you?
They weren't there.
Rapid subduction, like rapid plate subduction.
That rapid, whatever, is ridiculous. So you need to stay off of that, because it's just retarded to think that geologic processes happen at blinding speeds. They don't.
Okay, they don't now, but you're saying that the present is the key to the past. But we have evidence and we have actual proof that shows us that it was rapid subduction. Otherwise, they would have joined the neighboring temperatures. Like again, it doesn't matter what kind of minerals were in these rocks. You could put a bunch of minerals together. You could put every type of mineral together in a rock, put it on a stovetop. It's going to heat up regardless. Okay, the point is irrelevant. The point of the mineral composition is irrelevant. You take Earth's crust and you place it on some stovetop somewhere, eventually it's going to heat up. You can't say that these 10-mile thick pieces of cold rock have been sitting in the ground for millions and millions of years. They had to be subducted rapidly. That is the only explanation geologically.
I just got through telling you it wasn't millions and millions of years. These things happen.
Okay, but it's 1 to 2 inches per year, though. So your model says that it's 1 to 2 inches per year that they subduct. If it's 1 to 2 inches per year, everything would have been cooked. The entire slab would have been cooked. Might not have even been detected by tomography. So these seismic data scans wouldn't have even detected it. It would have just said, all right, this is all molten rock. The point is that this is irrefutable evidence. And I think it's a weak rescue device to say, well, it's just mineral composition is better. It's false. It doesn't matter what kind of mineral composition we're talking about. You put anything inside of 7,000 degree temperatures, it's going to heat up very quickly, which proves that these were subducted in the recent past and very fast.
I'll send you the articles that I read about cold slabs. I do think that you're ignoring a lot of what I say. Maybe I'm not making myself clear. That rapid, whatever, I know AIG says that there was rapid plate tectonics. And they say in specific words that the plates were moving at 45 miles per hour. Now you think about that for a minute. I checked. A water ski boat goes 20 miles an hour. So those plates were moving twice as fast as a boat would pulling skiers. And you're telling me that that's a geological process and it happens. Well, it doesn't. It didn't happen that way. Okay, let me move to
Am I asking questions now, or is it just?
Yeah, let me stop right there, David. So we allowed you to pick 3 topics. We had a little back and forth on that. And now, to be fair, let's have Matt maybe pick 3 topics, 3 questions that we can go back and forth on as well. Matt, go ahead.
Sure. So the first one that I'm going to bring up here is these bent rock layers. Okay, we can't agree on things such as rapid plate subduction because, of course, it goes against uniformitarianism. I understand that. It's the sacred cow of an evolutionist. It's the holy grail, if you will. So here's some evidence that you could see. Again, I don't necessarily expect myself to persuade you, but I think that these photos, I think anybody watching in the audience with an open mind would conclude that this formed catastrophically. Hard rock does not bend. If you try to bend hard rock, it breaks. So to say that all these layers that you see here are different ages is not true. And you have to justify these things coming into existence slowly over millions of years of geologic time. How do you justify these buckled and bent rock layers that demonstratively lithified together all at the same time? How do you deal with that?
I need my slides again. So it just happens to be the next slide. There are all kinds of folding that takes place because of stresses and deformation. When these rocks are placed under stress, whether it's being pulled or pushed or stretched, that stress causes deformation. Temperature causes deformations. And here's a whole list of types of deformation that are actually observed by geologists. They work on it. I have been to work on anticlines and synclines, so I know from firsthand knowledge that they're not all layers from the same time. And that folding is certainly possible in rock layers. And so there's some information about folding if you want to go back and look at it.
So you think, you really believe, right? You really believe that through slow and gradual changes, these rocks magically bent themselves due to slow and gradual changes in the Earth's crust and not catastrophism. My friend, this is demonstrated catastrophism. It doesn't matter what rescue device you bring to the table here. You can't bend hard rock. You say, well, under heat and pressure. How are you have to heat a rock up quite a bit to be able to get them bent out of a large rock.
Exactly.
Rocks are typically always the same temperature. They're not going to just heat up to 1,000 degrees and become pliable in nature. That's not how nature works. That's not how ecosystems work. These rocks were formed catastrophically and then lithified together when plate tectonics rapidly pushed them up into place. Again, this is something that you can actually verify. It's something that you can see with your eyes. It's something that we know to be true. You're just repeating arguments that you've heard from these supposed evolutionary colleagues that have no idea what they're talking about, because we cannot, if you can't bend hard rock, you can't just conclude that these bent themselves. And if you look at the slide that I have up here, these are at a 90-degree angle and they're not broken. If they would have been brought up slowly through this process, they would have all shattered. In fact, the mountain would have eroded as it was being created. Okay, because like I said, the plates only move 1 to 2 inches per year. They would have eroded flat, Mr. Emery. So yeah, the whole reason mountains exist is because of the flood of Noah. That's the whole reason. To try to reason it away, it is what it is.
I'm not trying to reason it away, and geology is not evolutionist.
Okay, but evolution is based on the geologic column.
No,
right?
no. Evolution, it has to do with plants and plant life and animal life. Geology has to do with rocks.
Okay,
And
so do you want to move on?
every geologist that I've ever talked to, and believe me, I went to a geology school, so I know these geologists. Not a single one of them says rocks don't fold and it's because of creation. That's not the way it goes. Geology has.
You say that geology is not. You say geology is not evolution. Do you want to talk about Darwinian evolution? What part of the mutation through selection process is going to drive a species of fish to mankind over millions of years? What kind of errors that have accumulated in the genome are going to cause?
You're completely bringing up a totally different topic.
Well, you brought up, here's the thing, you brought up evolution, right? You said this is not evolution. This is creation versus evolution debate, I understand. So if you want to talk evolution, let's talk about descent with modification. Here's the thing, I believe in descent with modification, but I think that those modifications are limited to what the genome offers. So, I mean, I'd like to know what kind of mutations drive fish to fishermen, which is what evolution teaches. As silly as it sounds, as crazy as it sounds, what are these group of beneficial mutations that got poured into some population that caused us to evolve to where we are today?
So this list of 20 things that you brought up, you're ready to just dump those for another topic. Is that what you're telling me now?
So Donny kind of wants us to do 3 different topics, and you brought up evolution. You said, well, geology is not evolution. And obviously, at some point, we got to deal with evolution. So I was just thinking that might have been a good transition. I'm happy to talk about rocks. But here's the thing. I think at some point, people in the audience are going to get bored of us going in circles about how you think these rocks slowly formed through plate tectonics, whereas I'm stating that they formed via a flood. We'll agree to disagree.
Well,
I do think that's actually a good idea, because we are going on the hour and 13-minute mark, and the first 4 topics now have been geology related. So why don't we transition into more of the biology and genetics realm? And so the second topic that Matt has picked up, has chosen, is mutations and selection as the driving forces behind evolutionary change, David. So maybe we could discuss that for a little bit. Gentlemen, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so let's talk about this for a minute. So mutation through selection that created these new populations, that caused us to evolve from fish. As crazy as it sounds, let's talk about it. A mutation, you can see here, is defined as an error. It is a change that occurs in our DNA sequence due to what? Mistakes. So by all these errors and all these mistakes, somehow we've become human. How does that make any sense? Even just using an evolutionary assumption, how does that make sense that mutations and errors, things that cause our genome to degrade, cause us to develop things like autism, cancer, Down syndrome, going to somehow create a good population?
I find it fascinating that creationists are so quick to redefine terms. Mutation, all it means is a change in the genome.
All right,
That's
wait a
all.
minute. Hold on, I've got it right here. This is not a creationist source. Again, this is from Biology for Majors 101. This is the basics of science that says it's a change in DNA sequence due to mistakes. So you say it's a change in DNA sequence, yes, but you're leaving off that it's due to mistakes when DNA is replicated.
Okay, so what would cause a non-detrimental mutation? Is that called a mutation, or is it called something else?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you were saying. Can you say that again?
If you talk about something changing from what it was before into something new, what is that change called? It's not a mutation, because mutations are bad. So not a mutation, but something happened.
Yeah, it's called built-in genetic heterozygosity, front-loading the genome with the ability to diversify. It's the reason that speciation exists. Speciation is not due to some mutation that got added, right? It could be in some cases, but in most cases, speciation is due to the front-loading of the genome that we were created with, and the ability to diversify, the ability to create new species, the ability to pass on interesting sets of different sets of genomes to these populations.
Can you explain to me what heterozygosity is?
Yeah, heterozygosity simply means diversity, built-in genetic ability to diversify. So, it's the ability for us to diversify as a population, to have different traits. It was built into us when we were created by God.
Okay, so I heard you say earlier, and this was way earlier in the debate, that we do not have diversity. We don't have a great deal of diversity. It's very small. Can you
Yeah.
explain that?
Sure. No, that's a good question. So basically, we have low genetic diversity in the sense of we have not diversified that much as a population. So we're talking about population size now, as opposed to built-in genetic diversity, okay? So it's two completely different fields. Low genetic diversity means that we have not diversified that much, which means we have not been here that long, which is another reason that we were created recently and not millions of years ago.
So you're saying the human race, the human Homo sapiens, has not been here that long, so we don't have diversity. Is that what you're saying?
We haven't diversified that much. We have a lot of heterozygosity. Don't get me wrong. You know, we have the ability still to diversify, but that ability is limited to what the genome offers, and it's becoming more and more limited as we diversify. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay, what about it is false? Because we see it today. We actually can see. Again, Mr. Emery, this is something we can verify. My friend, we accumulate. Think about this. We accumulate 100 to 200 mutations per generation. These mutations are invisible to selection. Selection cannot see them. If we die from mutations, and these mutations are getting added in, that tells me that ape to man couldn't have even been possible, because we couldn't have persisted. We can't have persisted. We could not possibly persist for millions of years in the future. That means that we could not have existed for millions of years in the past. All population geneticists, all of them, know, or at least most of them, know that the human genome is rusting out like a car. All mutations must have some effect, even if that effect is vanishingly small. So you pour in a bunch of neutral mutations over generations, the very things that cause us to degrade as populations will cause us to die. We are going downhill and not uphill. We are devolving and not evolving. This is what basic science has shown us.
I find it kind of amusing that creationists, some of the others I've talked to, call evolution is all about dying, because you have to die to improve or something like that. It seems to me that creationism is all about dying. You talk about the fall of man came after death. God sent the flood, killed everybody. After that, people died. The king died. Now we're talking about the human race is going to die out. We're just, woe is me. You might as well pack up your bags because we're all going to die. I think that's not true. If you want to show me genetic proof that I have 100 more deleterious mutations in my DNA than my parents did, I'd be glad to look at that. I don't think that happens. What happens with mutations, the real mutations, I don't know, let's say a bird has a mutation that his beak is bigger. Some other bird might have a mutation that he didn't have a beak. And, well, he's going to die because he doesn't have a beak. So that mutation is gone. It's not going to be spread to other of his, his species. And that's what happens in evolution is you go down a path. Evolution is making very small changes, slowly but surely, with selective and that is if there's a deleterious mutation, that individual dies off. It doesn't go into the population. So somehow you guys think that a mutation is in the population already. What the evolutionists are telling you is that a mutation is in an individual. And the individual, if it's better, if natural selection picks it up as better, then he spreads that mutation.
Okay. Even if I grant, right? Even if I grant that there are some sort of beneficial mutations that are getting added to the genome, it does not prevent other deleterious information getting poured in that is blind to selection. Like I said, selection cannot see it. This is why this is probably our most lethal argument against evolution. Is pointing out that yes, and this is common knowledge. You can look it up. You see, I need some sort of evidence for this. Go to Google and type it in. Type in, do we accrue mutations? Do we accrue 100 more mutations than our parents? It's common knowledge. It's like asking, is there water in the ocean? Is the sky blue? You know, I need evidence for that. Well, just look up. Look around. These mutations, it doesn't matter. Yes, you say individuals evolve. You know, these individuals get weeded out. It still doesn't, it's still, again, we're talking about populations as a whole. Populations, you know, every individual within these populations still accrues these mutations, and they're invisible to selection, which means selection's not acting upon them. And if we die from mutations, that means that we could not have persisted for millions of years in the past, and we could not have been, we could not have arrived here to be able to have this conversation by a bunch of mutations getting poured in, because mutations, like I said, are errors in the human genome. They're defined as a copying error, a mistake due to a change in the DNA sequence. Okay, and like I said, all population geneticists know this. This is common knowledge that we are degrading. The human genome is rusting out like a car. And yes, it is verifiable that you have 100 to 200 more mutations than your parents. This is just a fact of science. We become multiply mutant. It's like a copying machine. I'm going to turn it back over to you because I don't want to just run the show here or anything. Go ahead.
I'm very curious about this. I have a real problem because there are, I mean, genetics is an entire field of science. And you and Donnie seem to be experts at genetics. Geology is an entire field of science, but you seem to be an expert in geology. Chemistry, an entire field of science, but yet you seem to be an expert. The way AIG does things, the Institution for Creation Research, all these places, they do things by let's throw out geology wholesale. We don't want to, nothing that geologists do is right. We're going to start over and we're going to prove geological principles based on creation. That just doesn't fly with me.
Okay, well, again, you find whales on mountains. You find that are perfectly preserved. Okay, this is part of geology, right? This is a fact within geology, and they didn't get there from some uniformitarianistic process. I could point to hundreds of pieces of evidence, hundreds, right now in this conversation, that shows that geology and creation science go hand in hand. I know we got to move on because we're for sake of time. So this will be the third thing that I bring up, because I noticed in your debate with Kent Hovind and a few other times that you had mentioned that nobody believes, right, that we came from rocks. But if you were to type in on Google, you owe your life to a rock, it brings up a paper called You Owe Your Life to Rock. You said life started in the pond. It didn't start from a rock. According to this article, it says, thank goodness for granite. That's how the article starts out. Thank goodness for granite. You know, we need to thank God for life, not rock, not granite grandfather. Look at this. This is scientifically peer-reviewed paper, Genesis, Rocks, Minerals, the Geochemical Origin of Life. Look at this. It says, life arose as a natural chemical process more than half a century It's a natural chemical process. More than half a century of experimental research has underscored the dynamic interactions of atmosphere, oceans, and rocks that fostered this ancient transition from geochemistry to biochemistry. Researchers have, check this out, it says, researchers on the origin of life now conclude that rocks and minerals must have played a key role in virtually every phase of life's emergence. So, Mr. Emery, once again, when you get on video and say, well, nobody believes that life started from a rock, we all believe it started in the pond, you're just listening to other atheist YouTubers that are telling you this. Because if you look at the actual papers, they're saying we owe our life to rocks. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for, thank goodness for granite. It sounds so weak. It sounds so ridiculous. That's why the atheists denounce it and say, well, I don't really believe I came from a rock, because they know how stupid it sounds, how crazy it sounds. So this is part of the theory of evolution. It's defined as chemical evolution, the arising of chemicals of non-living matter to living matter. So let's talk about this. I know you said that you don't believe, nobody says that life came from a rock. I feel like I have to, with all due respect, correct you on this point.
All right. You can correct me on that. Maybe according to you, life came from a rock. I'm not convinced of that. I'm not convinced that all of that happened, abiogenesis. I do know that there are lots and lots of experiments going on where single cell life now becomes multi-cell life, and that happens. All this happens, and the things that you tell me are wrong. They don't happen like that. And then you want me to believe young Earth creationism when none of the stuff that you brought up happens like that.
Well, here's the thing. I brought up even scientific papers, and I've referenced certain papers. I bring up fact and statistic after statistic, fact after fact, photo after photo. Like it's all there. You can see it with your own eyes. If you don't believe it, guess what? There's an audience of people that'll be watching this, and they can decide. I would encourage anybody in the audience to research what I'm saying, because they'll find, if they actually research it with an open mind, that it is true, and that creation science is the best alternative for people that are looking at the other side, and that this is something that's demonstrably true, that it is a fact. And the thing is, they will say, it sounds so stupid that you say that life came from a rock, Matt, and nobody believes that. Look, I went out to Arizona State University. I interviewed college students, and they all said, yeah, we believe life came from rocks, because there's no God, and that must have been how life started. So the title of this article is, You Owe Your Life to a Rock, or to rock. They're saying that we evolved from rocks. The same people that say that we evolved from rocks are the same people that are saying that we evolved from sponges. The same man that founded evolution, Charles Darwin, the man who couldn't get a job, that stopped off the Galapagos, saw 18 types of finches, and concluded that, well, everything must share common ancestry because I've seen a little variation. It's superstitious. Darwin had no idea what he was talking about, yet his ideas are somehow considered just a good method of science and a good method to use for rationality. Makes no sense to me. There's so many failed predictions. In science, remember, it's about the power to predict. What could I predict with my model, or with a model that will come forth to be true? What novel, testable predictions can we make? And if we confirm those predictions, we have a strong case. And evolution and atheism, all of it, has had failed predictions based on failed assumptions, false assumptions. And I will say that I think, to just kind of close out my case here, because I don't want to go on and on and on and in circles with you, Mr. Emery. You can either believe what these people are saying, the same people that are saying we evolved from rocks, or that monkeys surfed across the ocean. Like, please don't tell me you actually think that that's true. These same people are saying all this crazy stuff. And the whole surfing monkeys thing, I don't want to go off on that. Do you believe that that's an actually plausible explanation for how these monkeys got from Africa to South America? Are you willing to believe something like that?
I have no idea about that.
Okay, I
But
was just curious.
let me ask you. Uh, let's think about you. You talk about Noah's flood. The ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat, which are most likely in the Middle East,
Turkey.
Turkey or somewhere. And there was two of every kind on the ark. So there was a monkey kind on the ark, two of them. Now, in Africa, there are monkeys. Those monkeys do not have prehensile tails. They're completely different than the monkeys in South America. But what I'm wondering is, how did those two monkeys get to South America from the ark?
And I'm
So
going to
you're
jump in, Matt, just before you respond. Of course, take your time to respond, Matt. What I'll have to do is, because we're already over on the discussion, it's been such a fantastic discussion, very, very much enjoying this. So what we'll do is we'll have Matt respond to David, to your really good question. And then David, whatever your response is going to be, save it for your 5-minute concluding statement. We'll go into concluding statements after Matt's response.
Right.
Gentlemen, good job. Easy to moderate. Matt, go ahead with your response.
Sure thing. So what I would say, what was your question again there, David?
There were two monkeys on the ark. So
Yeah.
they got off the ark in Turkey, but somehow monkeys got to South America. And so
Right.
I'm just wondering how
Good
they
question.
got there.
No, that's a good question. So post-flood, immediate post-flood, we would expect that there would be land bridges everywhere, ice bridges even. And so monkeys would have been able to simply get there via land bridges, or even by somebody taking them on a boat. It's not that they, that question is a good question. But if you look at what the evolutionary model predicts or retrodicts, if you will, on this matter, they're saying that this is how they got there. So I would say they got there via land bridges. Evolutionists and atheists say they surfed there on vegetation mats. Says, and they're basing it on teeth. And again, fossilized teeth. If you find a fossil, it means rapid burial. What would cause rapid burial? Noah's flood. So it doesn't matter how you shuffle the deck of cards. It doesn't matter how you try to reason it away. Yes, there would have been land bridges immediately post-flood. They would have been able to get there that way, or maybe somebody took them there. That's a good question. But I would say turn the mirror on your own theory.
So
that says that they actually surfed there.
So they came up with their speculation that maybe monkeys were on land bridges and taken over there by a storm. And your speculation is that there might have been land bridges, or maybe somebody was there with a speedboat that could take them over to South America. It seems to me that both of those are speculation, and you're really grasping at straws to base such a major point on such a minor speculation. And that's just my opinion about that.
All right, gentlemen, if you want to conclude there in terms of the discussion, lots of great points discussed. Any final points that you guys want to make? Let's save them for the concluding statements. We got 5 minutes each to kind of wrap up our thoughts. And if there's any final arguments we want to address, we can do it now. So, David, since you started, we'll give you the first 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes, I should say. Matt, we'll give you 5 minutes, and then we'll get into some of these audience questions. So, okay, appreciate it. David, go ahead, 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. I want to go through this list very quickly. I promise to try to keep it quick. I just don't want Matt to think that I waved these off when it's actually him that waved them off. If you're going to bring them up, you should be able to discuss them. Polystrate trees is only trees. You call them polystrate fossils, but it's only trees. Trees are made of cellulose and things that are very difficult to break down. There's no reason why. Yes, there was rapid burial. Those trees were buried and they became fossils. Upside down, you're a little wrong on that one, because you're saying that a tree floated around and then landed on its trunk sticking up out of the mud. That's unlikely. I talked about bending rock, clams in the closed position. There are no clams on Mount Everest. There is marine life there, and it's very understandable from plate tectonics why there's marine life, but there are no clams. I looked up about clams in a closed position. I couldn't find anything from biology, but I did find that 5 different chefs talk about when you cook clams, you put the clams in a bowl and rinse them, and then the ones that are closed you throw away because they're dead. You only keep the ones that are open a little bit. So closed clams mean dead clams. Whales on mountains. The whale that you're talking about was found on the Santa Cruz Mountain, which was about 30 miles from the ocean. So think about 30 miles. And scientists were really excited because it was nearly complete. There was a skull. They found a few vertebrae. They found some tail pieces. So they were excited, but it wasn't like an entire whale skeleton found its way into the Rocky Mountains. The asteroid I talked about, soft tissues, is another issue. You mentioned that they're unfossilized. That's ridiculous. And that's about all I had on my list of things for you. So all I would say is, yes, I have personally Googled things every time Matt or Kent or AIG says something. I run and Google and look it up because I want to know the truth, not what somebody says off the top of their head. Oh, these cold slabs, they've touched the center of the earth. You can't just make up science and expect it to be correct. And that's what I would say to creationists. I still believe that there are things wrong with Noah's flood. I believe that there are things wrong in Genesis chapter 1. I can tell you that there are problems with you saying that all the layers in the Grand Canyon went in as one big event. That didn't happen. 4 of those layers that are in the middle are wind layers caused by wind. And so you've got some problems there that haven't been addressed. No one that I've ever seen has addressed a global flood. You say that it was a global flood and there are evidences all over the earth. I haven't seen any of those evidences. AIG talks about Grand Canyon. That's the only thing they want to talk about. Institution for Creation Research, all of those, they want to talk about the Grand Canyon for some reason. But I have never heard someone say, in Spain, there is this outcrop of rock that was obviously under the flood. What I would like to see is evidence that in these separate continents, they were under the flood. It happened at the same time. So that you can't say, well, over here it happened at 4,000 BC, but over here this happened in 6,000 BC. This one over here was 2,000 BC. That's not a global flood. So there has to be some kind of proof
20 seconds.
The whole thing happened all at once. And if you guys think that I'm wrong, then you need to look up some things too. Okay, I'm done.
All right. Thank you, David, for that concluding statement. We're now going to hand it over to Matt. Matt, you have between 5 and 6 minutes for your concluding statement. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Sure thing. Well, David, I just want to say I think it was a fairly pleasant discussion. I appreciate the invitation. I'd just like to reiterate that everything that I brought up in this debate, right? You know, every argument, every talking point is something that you can actually verify. You can verify it online, and you can see where it's true and why it's true. And I always tell people when I meet them on the street, evolutionists and atheists, that I can show them what evolution teaches and why it is not true. And I can show what the Bible teaches and why it is true. Evolution says that life began in the water. If you Google, how does water get destroyed? The first thing that pops up is that it breaks down in sunlight and water. How does DNA get destroyed? Here's the thing. What was the RNA world like? Sunlight and water. The very thing that destroys DNA somehow assembled DNA. In Genesis, where it says that God formed man on the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Number one, that has more power. Number two, that's what we know must have happened, because life could not have begun in the water, because water scatters DNA molecules. I'd like to address some of the things you mentioned in your closing. You said that this whale was 30 miles from the ocean that was found on the top of this mountain. That's my point. You're proving my point, that this flood was covering states of water. It was covering the entire continent of the United States, the entire world, the entire globe. And it buried all sorts of sea life and crustaceans, whales on top of mountains, 30 miles from the coast. I mean, that just proves that it was some sort of catastrophic event that put it up there. So again, to say that naturalism and these slow and gradual changes in the Earth's crust is what brought us to where we are today is not true. In order to have a preservation, you have to have rapid burial. And you also mentioned, well, yeah, you find clams on the top of mountains, and that's because of plate tectonics. We all know that. That is something that both models predict. That's something that both models have confirmed. But where evolution fails is that these clams were found closed and not open. If it was slow and gradual change that put them up there and they just died in nature, they would have been open, and a scavenger would have came and ate them. The reason that they're closed is because they were buried by catastrophism and shoved up the mountain rapidly to where they could not open. They were buried under mud to the point where they could not open when they died. So that's what you're leaving off. Again, some of these things that you're saying are true, but it's not the whole truth. We need to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And to say that mutations through selection brought into existence you and I is a lie. It is not true. And we can show it to be true. We can show it to be a lie, that mutation through selection is what brought us into existence. You said that nowhere do these slabs touch even the core of the Earth. Anybody can look this up. Again, I'm going to encourage the audience, let the audience decide to Google this information, and they will find it, and they will see that it is true, despite your assertion that it is false. And if you can't show it to be false, you don't know it to be false. Yeah, there's just a lot of things that you'd mentioned, and I just kind of want to leave it with this. Evolution has so many failed predictions, right? One of the things that they predicted is that fossils take 10,000 years to form, 10 plus thousand years. And the reason we know that's false is because we find things like fossilized ripples of water, fossilized raindrops. Look, these things had to have been buried so quickly and protected so quickly in order to be preserved, David. So, Mr. Emery, I would encourage you to look at these lines of evidence. Is it really logical to conclude that fossilization and these uniformitarianistic processes took millions and millions of years? We even find fossilized fish giving birth. It doesn't take millions of years to give birth. It didn't sit there in the ground waiting to be fossilized, otherwise it would have deteriorated. Again, this is something that we know to be true. Surface areas are destroyed so quickly and just taken out so quickly that they could not possibly be preserved outside of rapid catastrophic burial. But we find these beautiful photos, right, of raindrops that are fossilized. Again, surface areas get destroyed. They do not sit there waiting for 10,000 plus years waiting to get fossilized. We find a fossilized group of fish, a whole school of fish just instantaneously buried and fossilized. Again, Noah's flood is the only explanation for these things. And yes, it is true. And yes, it is verified that there are trees that actually go through multiple layers. And not only that, they are upside down. My point was that the trunk of the tree, they get waterlogged when they're being catastrophically removed. Sometimes the roots are just ripped right off the roots. They float around and they had flipped upside down, and the trunk of the tree is at the top of those layers. So I'm sorry, trees don't grow upside down. Again, you said that's not true. It's verifiably true. It's something that you can Google. It's something you can look up. It's something we can see for a fact. It's not that I'm just pulling stuff out of my behind. And you said, well, you know, most dinosaur bones are fossilized, or you know, these bones, they are fossilized. Well, here's the thing. Let me pull this over here. This is from one of the leading paleontologists in the world right now, Philip Currie. He admitted that usually, he says here, most of the original bone is present in a dinosaur fossil. These are unfossilized, okay? You have part of it that gets fossilized, maybe just the very outer edge, but the whole bone is still inside, perfectly preserved. So, again, these are things that you're saying are false, but we can verify them to be true. The things that you are saying are verifiably true are things that we know to be false. Again, it's you know, I'm not trying to be degrading or rude to you, Mr. Emery. Like I said, I'd love to see you join us. You said you can't trust Genesis. Of course, this is where it goes, into heresy, into utter nonsense, into just denying God's word and joining hands with a bunch of atheists. You really think that these people that believe in magic, that the world created itself from nothing, are going to be smart enough to figure out that mutations cannot create all this great new information? They're not able to figure that out. It's the same crowd that thinks that there's more than two genders is going to tell you that evolution is true. The same crowd that thinks the universe magically poofed into existence is the same crowd that's telling you that thus saith the Lord is false. Don't compromise, my friend. And all of this crowd, you know, that you've been watching and learning their arguments from, apparently, because like I said, even some of them word for word, I'm hearing
20 seconds.
Some of these atheists, 20 seconds, from some of these atheist YouTubers that constantly put out videos against me, word for word, you know. My mind kind of drew a blank there. All I know is that, you know, I've verified a lot of this information. That's why I put it in slides, so people can actually see it with their own eyes. And yes, you know, we were created in the beginning, and it was Adam and Eve, right? Not Adam and Steve. Again, the crowd that you're agreeing with is the very crowd that is they're so skeptical that they just happen to buy into the craziest ideas that have ever been invented by the minds of man. They're so skeptical of the Bible, yet they'll believe anything you tell them. They'll believe anything that their college professor says. So I would encourage you to think outside of what these people have said and to consider what God's word says when it said that in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. We can trace those lineages back of people that existed in the recent past to about 6,000 years. The Bible says that creation of Adam was the beginning. God bless.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt, for that concluding statement. Gentlemen, much appreciated. Thank you so much for the debate. Time has flown by. So what we're going to do is get through. Yeah. Oh, I thought you were going to say something, Matt. Oh, okay, good. Thanks, gentlemen. And we'll get through a few questions that have come in from the audience. I'll put a timer in terms of the questions because we've got a ton that came in. So we'll just get through as many as we can. And I'll give you gentlemen a 30-second break here as I just give a couple shout outs for upcoming debates. We will be back here tomorrow, same time, 8 o'clock for a debate specifically on endogenous retroviruses. So myself and Luca Medugno, we will be engaging that topic. Are endogenous retroviruses evidence that humans and chimps share a common ancestor? Then a couple days after that, we've got Battle of the T's here, T-Rock, T-Jump, Creation versus Evolution. And coming up quickly at the end of the month, Dr. Dino's big 300th debate. I am very excited for this one. Dr. Dino and Dr. Jay Bundy. So they will be debating evolution on trial, and that'll be at the end of the month. Okay, let's get through some of these questions now. And the first one comes in from right here. Cover to cover book reviews. This question is for you, David Emery. So he asks, if you can't trust the Bible on a literal 6-day creation and the global flood, how can you be sure of a literal Jesus Christ? Go ahead, David.
Jesus Christ was a man. He lived on earth. History tells us that. He died. He rose again. He ascended to the right hand of his Father. I know all that because he lives in my heart. I can guarantee you because he lives in my heart. I didn't say that I didn't trust the Bible. I said that there are some specific problems with Genesis chapter 1. If you're going to talk about literal that it's not translated, it's a literal book, King James Version, there's some issues there in the first chapter. And I'll save that for another time.
Okay, thank you, David. Matt, anything you want to add, brother? Oh, Matt, I think your mic might have been either turned off.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No worries.
If you can't trust Genesis 1, why would you trust any of the Bible? It's just common sense would tell you that if the foundations be destroyed, what shall the righteous do? The Bible says. Think about that. My people perish for lack of knowledge. And the thing is, evolutionists and this atheistic perspective, this evolutionistic, theistic evolutionist perspective that we're debating tonight, is not based on knowledge. I've shown that to be the case. It's called believing things that are verifiably false. We have a genome that we can examine. We have phylogenetic trees that we have created. And we have shown that mankind has only been here about 6,000 years. And it is consistent with Genesis chapter 1. You look at the Y chromosome of a human, the Y chromosome of a chimp, they're not similar at all. Supposedly, we descended from chimps, yet Y chromosome is directly inherited, supposedly, from these chimps into the man. We share more with the gorilla's Y chromosome than with the chimp's Y chromosome, yet we're supposedly not related to gorillas, not closely related to gorillas. We didn't descend from gorillas. Evolution makes no sense. Creationism and creation science is what has made the best, strongest testable predictions. And that is why we know for a fact that Genesis 1 is correct and that it was translated correctly in the King James Bible, my final authority in all manners of faith and practice. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on that. If you reject Genesis 1, you're going to end up just compromising on the rest of the Bible.
Thank you very much, Matt, for that response. David, question was for you, so we'll give you the last word before we move on. Go ahead, David.
Again, as I said, it's not that I don't trust the Bible. I don't trust, I'm not even going to say trust. It's not trust. There are some issues in chapter 1 of Genesis. And if you're going to take Genesis absolutely literally, then you're going to have a few problems when you get through, I would say, even the first 4 or 5 verses.
All right.
I really just don't want to go into it right now.
Okay, no worries. Thank you, David. Next question comes in from Mark Reed, $5 super chat. Thank you so much. This one is for Matt. So he asks, Matt Powell, if fish cannot be driven to walk on land, then please explain the mud skipper. It's a fish that can walk on land and climb trees and breathe air.
That's a very good question. So we would predict in the creationist orchard of species and the model that we have that there would be all sorts of millions of species. And so, of course, we're going to find species that would appear as if they are transitioning. So you have a fish, right, that can walk on the land. He's saying that can climb trees. I'd have to look into that. I've never heard of that. But you're saying you have a fish that can walk on the land. Okay, big deal. It doesn't mean that we descended from these creatures. It means that God created homologous structures in nature. It means that there's just different species out there that are unique. It doesn't mean that we descended from these animals. I never said that a fish can't walk. You know, I'm sure there are different creatures out there that are unique like that, because if God created us with similar DNA, and if God created everything in the entire world, even the grass that shares a certain amount of DNA with us, we could conclude that some of it would, that some of these animals would end up appearing as transitions. It's only because they're simply homologous structures. They're just created beings. They're just created animals. And so I think that would be the best answer for that. It doesn't mean we descended from them. Okay, great, big deal. You found a tiktaalik, some species of, sea to land. Great. It doesn't mean that that's a transition. You could line up fossils in any way that you want, but at the end of the day, it's all just speculation.
All right. Thank you, Matt, for that response. David, anything you'd like to add?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Appreciate it. Next question comes in from Randall Alexander. Question for David. How do we get brand new rock? And has it ever been dated at minutes old or even a couple of years old?
Oh, that's a very good question, because I actually ran into that. I'm not sure what you mean by brand new rock. I mean, the earth is made out of rock, and the rock that we see from volcanoes or whatever is part of the earth. So it's all going to be the age of the earth. I found a really, I don't know, you guys won't laugh, but I thought it was funny. It was AIG was trying to prove that radiometric dating was wrong. And they took some rocks from Mount St. Helens lava and sent them off to different labs. I happened to get one of those labs' names, and I emailed them and I asked them, what did you think about this from AIG? And at first he was very incensed and said, we don't deal with companies like that anymore. And I can't talk about specific clients, but I can tell you that in our literature, it specifically says that they cannot date things that are less than 100 years old. So here we have a rock from Mount St. Helens that AIG knew well and good, came out of the volcano in 1987, and they still sent it in and touted all this stuff about, one lab said one thing, one lab said another, and this lab is saying that you're going to get erroneous results because we don't date things that are less than 100 years old. So take that for what you will. And I know Kent often says, how can the youngest layer be on the top? What, did it come from outer space or something? He talked about two different things and conflates them together. So he's saying the layer on the top is the youngest. That is a geological principle. And then he says, where did rock come from? Did rock come from outer space? It's not the rock that they're saying is the youngest. It's the layer.
10 seconds.
The layer. Okay? So that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, thank you, David. Matt, anything you'd like to add?
Sure thing. Well, when it comes to these radiometric isotopes and all this dating, again, it's nothing but assumptions that goes into this. You're assuming that when these rocks lithified, all of these, even the laboratory that you emailed, it would have been the Geochron laboratories, because that was the laboratory that those samples were sent to. When they go to test the age of these rocks, they're assuming that the rate of decay has always been the same over time. They're assuming that no daughter element or father element or parent element has ever been contaminated into the rock. The rock has never been contaminated. Look, we can create new radiometric isotopes in a lab, and the next day they date as millions of years old. Brand new isotopes. So is radiometric dating true? Is it true that we can date these rocks and date the crust of the Earth with absolute certainty? No, we cannot. Science means to know. What do we know for a fact? If this is all based on assumptions, then it cannot be taken as science. Somehow it is looked at as science, but it is all based on nothing more than an assumption. Lightning itself causes radioactivity. So to say that these radiometric ages that we get, look, we're all looking at the same isotopes, but the assumption that's made is false. You can't know for a fact that no daughter element ever got into the rock, or that no parent element ever got into the rock. And again, we're getting technical, but I think that these things need to be brought to the forefront and explained very concisely. And like I said, you can create new radiometric isotopes in a lab, and the next day they date as millions of years old. This is why radiometric dating is false. It is falsified.
All right, thank you for that response there, Matt. And David, question was for you. We'll give you a real quick final word if you'd like it.
Oh, I would definitely. First of all, I really, and I'm serious about this, I really want to see the reference where you had someone make radioactive elements in the lab, and the next day they were millions of years old. Could you please send me that reference? You can send it to Donny and he will forward it to me because I want to look that one up. I don't believe that for a second. Next is that you're saying that there are assumptions being made and that's why radiometric dating is wrong. And I could kick myself because I couldn't find the YouTube video, but Professor Dave did a video about radiometric dating. And the thing is that scientists do not date something by one method. They date it by several different methods. They date it relative dating using fossils, but they also do radiometric dating, and they may do cesium and lead and several different things. So unless they get dates that agree within a certain range, then that's an invalid test. Maybe the rock did get contaminated somehow, but they have definite scientific experiments that they run to test whether or not those rocks had that date, or if they've been contaminated, they can be thrown out and do something else. Okay, so it's not just, oh, let's assume that this happened years ago, and there was
10 seconds.
this certain amount of stuff. And I would like to say one other thing is, now I forgot it already. Never mind. I left my head.
All right, no worries. Okay, thank you both for the responses there. Next one comes in from SWE, $10 super chat. Thank you so much. And she has a question for Matt. So she asks, human chromosome 2 fusion arose via fusion. Human chromosome 2 arose via fusion. Some genes found near the area of chromosome fusion are expressed more intensely in our brains. Isn't chromosome 2 fusion evidence for the evolution of, I'm guessing humans? The last word cut off. Go ahead, Matt.
This supposed chromosome 2 fusion makes absolutely no sense because these chromosomes are functional, right? And if you smash together and fuse 2 chromosomes, it's not going to make functional information out of it. It's going to, by definition of fusing them together, cause them to be dysfunctional. So that is why it is not true. That it doesn't mean that we descended from chimps. So yeah, that would be my answer on that.
All right, appreciate it, Matt. David, anything you want to add quickly?
I think that it's grandstanding when you say these 2 chromosomes smashed together and that just can't happen. Well, smashing it together is not what they're saying. They're saying that they were side by side and they became fused and all of the pieces are there as if there was 2 chromosomes, but there's only 1. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, David. And Matt, you can have the last word if you want. It's your question.
It's all good. We can just go to the next question.
Okay. Thank you so much, gentlemen. So next question here comes in from, let's see. You want to say thank you to all the super chats that came in, not really with a question, but just expressing how much they enjoyed the debate. Jeff, thank you so much. He says, great channel. Keep it up. Praise God. Always. Amen. All the glory to God. So here's a question that comes in from Centurion 737. Question for you, David. Question for David. If there was no theory of evolution, would there still be fossils in the ground?
Did the theory of evolution create the fossils? I'm confused by that, but
I think he's asking if there were no. So if evolution never happened, right? If universal common ancestry were not true, would we still have fossils in the ground?
Well, I think that the fossils were there before we had universal common ancestry. You can look back into, I think it was in Crete and clearly ancient history. They find, fossil skulls of mammoths, and they think that it's a cyclops, and everybody's all afraid of it because it's a cyclops. So there were always fossils, everywhere there are. And the theory of evolution came into the game much later than fossils did. So sure, there would still be fossils.
Okay, thank you, David. Matt, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious the reason you get fossils is because of rapid burial, and the fact that they're throughout the entire column means that that column was formed by a flood. Sedimentary rock, by definition, is rock that was laid down by water. So if the Grand Canyon is made up of sedimentary rock, by definition, it was rock that was laid down by water. And all of those fossils that are found therein, you can find they were suffocated. We find certain fossils that are found, like trilobites, 15 million years before the actual trilobite fossil. We find their tracks as they're working their way up through the mud and dying. We find amphibians, 10 million years, supposedly, their tracks, 10 million years before we actually find their fossil. Again, the idea that it represents millions of years of geologic time is false. It is not true. And the method that Mr. Emery had mentioned here earlier, well, that we have different methods that we cross-reference this. Okay, here's the cross-referencing method, right? This is the method that is considered so scientific. It says the age of the rocks may be determined by the fossils found in them. And then it says scientists determine when fossils were formed by finding out the age of the rocks in which they lie. You date the fossils by the rocks, rocks by the fossils. This is World Book Encyclopedia, okay? Again, it's a circular argument. You can't use circular reasoning to be an example of cross-referencing. You need something that's outside of this realm to be able to verify this information. You can't just use a circular argument. And so, again, yeah, I mean, fossils are great proof of rapid burial. That is what we would predict as part of creation science and Noah's flood.
Okay, thank you so much, Matt, for the response. David, question was for you, so to be fair, you can have the final word.
I guess my comment there is oh, crap. It's past my bedtime. I guess I'm losing it. Yes, fossils are created by rapid burial. And it is not circular reasoning that they talk about that. Let's say we're in the Grand Canyon. We look at a layer of rock and we say, look, this rock has, some shell in it. And it's this, they can give you the Latin names. And I remember over in England, they found this same exact shell fossil in layers there. So this layer must be the same age as that layer because it's the same fossil. That's where they're using fossils to date the layers and layers to date the fossils. They're not doing it in the same layer. They're not saying, oh, look, there's a fossil and it's in this layer. So, that just doesn't make any sense. That's not scientific. And that's not the way it's done.
All right. Thank you, David, for that. Thank you for the response. Now, I do want to respect the time of the debaters. This awesome debate really has flown by. I know we got a ton of questions, but I do got to start winding it down at some point. So what I'm going to do is I picked 2 final questions out of the 100 that came in, and then we're going to wrap it up. So I appreciate the endurance from both Matt and David. So looks like we got one question for Matt and then one for David. Then we'll wrap it up. So question for Matt here comes in from SWE, another $10 super chat. Thank you so much for the question. And she asks, the Morrison Formation shows dinosaurs that decomposed in a dry environment. The stratigraphic position of the quarries show that there was a series of droughts. How does square with death by one? How does this square with death by one flood? So maybe she's insinuating there must have been multiple floods.
Yeah, I would say that some of this could have happened after the flood. Some of it could have even happened before the flood. I mean, you think of if you're finding certain areas where dinosaurs are decomposing and they're finding their remains and it wasn't buried by water. That could have possibly just been after the flood, post-flood. And yeah, we would expect that to happen to all sorts of different species, that different species would actually die from droughts, die from different things in nature. It doesn't prove that there's no global flood. The fact that they're asking that question shows that it's just a rescue device. Well, what about this? What about that? Instead of actually dealing with the evidence. So the fact is that we find 10,000 adult myosaur buried in the heart of the United States that left their young behind. We find hundreds and hundreds of dinosaur graveyards that were dinosaurs that were catastrophically buried with mud inside of their stomachs. Just because you find a group of dinosaurs that died in a drought doesn't negate the flood of Noah.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. And we're just going to go right to the next question. The last question. The question is going to be for you, David, if that's okay. And then we're going to wrap it up because we're coming at the 2.5 hour mark. So, again, thank you so much for the time that you've both given to us. So this question comes in from Taylor K. At Stand for Truth. Question for David: if no dinosaur peninsula, then why are the vast majority of dinosaur fossils all found in that one particular area?
I think that you need to relook at your map to see what area dinosaur fossils are found in, because that one area that Matt had circled with an oval, that is the Rocky Mountains. There could be fossils buried in the Rocky Mountains, but it's totally different. There were again the inland sea that surrounded that area that the Mysore were in. So there can be lots of fossils there. What I'm saying about the Dinosaur Peninsula is that there is no peninsula named the Dinosaur Peninsula. And there is no peninsula that runs from northeast to southwest. That's because the inland sea was there and the Rocky Mountains are there. So you're confusing your geography there. I did want to say one thing. I'm going back to the other question, but Matt said that sedimentary rock by definition is created by water. That's not true. You need to look up your definitions, because sedimentary rock is defined as rock that is laid down by lithification, and it can be wind. If you've ever been to Utah, all those Arches National Monument, all that was caused by wind. And if I could show you my geologic column from Grand Canyon, 4 of those layers in the middle were caused by wind. So you're saying that a flood laid all that down, but 4 of those were wind. So somehow there's a discrepancy there. And that's all I'll say.
Okay, David, thank you. That is the final question. Matt, is there anything you wanted to add before we wrap it up?
Yeah, so basically, like I said, you had obviously referenced this photo, and you said that you're afraid there's some inaccuracies in it, and that you can't find the name Dinosaur Peninsula anywhere. Look, regardless, there are hundreds of dinosaur graveyards in the center of the United States. The point that I was making was, and is, that these dinosaurs were catastrophically buried 2,000 miles away. The heart of the kill zone was 2,000 miles away from the Chicxulub asteroid. Basically, what that means is that the asteroid was not just something that just kicked up a little bit of dust and they choked on the dust and died. They were buried catastrophically by the waves of water that were caused by this catastrophic event. And they were buried with sea life and with crustaceans. And that is what we know happened. And yes, they were dead center in the United States. And again, people can look up this map. They can verify it. They can look up these dinosaur graveyards. And in fact, I showed earlier from secular science that they all admit that these were caused, all of these different graveyards were caused by flooding. And you mentioned the Grand Canyon. Look, if these layers, maybe some of them were formed by wind, because during the flood, there would have been a lot of wind. There would have been a lot of catastrophic processes going on, a lot of volcanism. And so these are all things that you have to take into account. I'm not just saying like every single layer was formed by just water. Obviously, that'd be false. There would be volcanism included because there's volcanic rock in there as well. And these things are all layered very neatly. Not in some areas they're pretty neat, but in other areas they're very, very catastrophic. And you see layers that are supposedly millions of years older than millions of years younger than the layers that they encapsulating these layers. So again, catastrophism is what best explains geology. And I just want to end with, the fact that, yes, this is all information that people can look up. They can verify it. Despite your accusations that this is all false, your assertions that this is just false information, misinformation, anybody can look it up and anybody can see that what I've said here tonight is 100% true, and that it is verifiably true.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for those that final response, final words. Again, Matt, David, thanks for doing this. I appreciate the time that you've both given to us. Creation versus evolution, fantastic debate. David, thank you for doing it as well. Any final words, final thoughts, David?
I have a lot of final thoughts, but I guess I'll keep them to myself. It seems that Matt doesn't want to listen to the things I tell him and goes right back to his canned speech, and I can't do anything about that. So I had a good time. Thank you.
Yes, very good. Thank you to the audience. Matt, thank you as well, brother. Final words, final thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was a good discussion. I would encourage Mr. Emery to look up the things that I mentioned, and not just to listen to YouTube videos of people that have dissenting opinions. Look, these are verifiable things. These are things that we can show to be true. We can show that mutations are false, that mutations creating us today as populations is not true. We can show that that our ancestors lived in the recent past and not millions of years ago. And I think I've shown the geological and scientific and genetic evidence of that. And I just want to say thank you to Mr. Emery for being willing to have the discussion for the challenge. I'm glad to take him up on the challenge, and I'd do it again anytime. Thanks so much.
Awesome. All right, Matt, David, thank you again for the debate. To the audience, thank you so much for all the questions that came in and for being so engaged in this important topic. So with that being said, Standing for Truth is out. God bless you all.
Please